Hi, and welcome back to Southern Stories, a podcast where real crimes, forgotten mysteries, and urban legends collide with each other. I'm your host, Brianna, and today we're traveling down a rural Michigan back road into a chilling true story that many believe inspired the opening scene of the 2001 horror film Jeepers Creepers. A story of a troubled marriage, a brutal crime, and a mysterious truck on a lonely highway, and witnesses who saw something they were never meant to see. This is the real life case of Dennis Henry Depew, the man some call the real creeper. Now, before we get into this crime, I just want to say that no, this has nothing to do with the Southern Stories and it's nothing down south. However, though, I really do like the movie Jeepers Creepers. So let's go ahead and let's get into the story because I find it very fascinating. Before the crime and before the chase and before the nationwide manhunt hit, there was a couple named Dennis Depew and Marilyn Depew. Marilyn was well liked, and of course, she was the high school counselor. She was very family oriented, calm, and compassionate. And well, Dennis, on the other hand, you can just say opposites really do attract to each other. Some say that he was withdrawn. Yes, he was intelligent, but he was controlling. And the man who he was demanded order, routine, and total obedience. Over time, the marriage, of course, deteriorated. Friends recalled Marilyn describing Dennis as aggressive, cold, and increasingly bitter. When the divorce hit, things became really, really messy and emotional and tense. Dennis felt like he was losing control of not only his marriage, the house, his reputation, and of course, his identity that he was to others. And when someone, of course, like this loses control, it can be dangerous. And I'm not just talking a little bit, I'm talking a lot. So let's go back to Easter Sunday in 1990. Dennis had two kids, of course, with Marilyn. And of course, they used to live in this really nice family home. But of course, they finally were divorced. So on April 15th of 1990, Easter Sunday, the tension finally exploded that Dennis couldn't handle it anymore. He arrived at the family's home under, of course, saying that he just wanted to check on his kids. And the argument sparked, and that's, of course, what changed everything. When the argument happened, it turned into a shouting match. The children watched as their father grew louder, angrier, and more violent toward Marilyn. Then Dennis just snapped. He attacked Marilyn on the staircase, beating her so badly the children ran to the neighbor's house just for help. Dennis, of course, told his kids that he was taking her to the hospital, so he loaded his injured ex-wife into a van, claiming that, again, he was going to take her to the hospital and everything was going to be okay. But later, she never actually arrived to the hospital, which is kind of upsetting. So let's go ahead, and as they're driving down, because, he's taking her to the hospital, he's driving her in the Royal Michigan back roads, and a couple named Ray and Mary Thornton were driving down a lonely stretch of road. It was a bright, beautiful day, nothing unusual, until a small scene caught their eye. There was this truck, a 1984 Chevy truck, the pale yellow, and it was large, drove up right behind them and was on their tail and just kept staying on their tail. So he finally sped around him. The Chevy truck did. And as they did, well, he just sped off. Later did they know they were actually going to see this truck again, but they just kind of played it off as he just had somewhere he needed to be right then. So, as of course, they were passing by an old abandoned schoolhouse, they saw something they shouldn't have seen. They saw that same truck that was tailgating them on the back roads. Then he saw the man holding something. It was long, wrapped, and it was stained like it had red paint all over it. They slowed, and the man just stared at them. So, of course, they just played it off as, he was doing a paint job or something at the school. The truck had personalized plate, and that looked like GZ something. But the couple, of course, were playing that goofy license plate game and joking about what it could stand for. Now, if you don't know what the license plate game is, it's just something, that they play, like, what does this mean? How many you can see of, like, different states and stuff like that. That's, of course, how we play it, but everybody else plays it differently. But it would later just become a joke, and it would end super quickly with this. Now, a few minutes later, that same truck appeared behind them again, going fast, following them closer and closer. Mary later told investigators that he wasn't just tailgating, it was like he was hunting them. After several intense miles, the truck finally backed off. The Thorntons finally caught their breath, and they was driven by instinct. They wanted to see what he had dumped or what he was doing at that school. So, of course, they turned around. Behind that school, they found blood, and not just a drop of it where he was like, oh, it could have been paint. No, it was a lot of it. The fabric, the torn, bloody fabric, was sticking out of a mound of dirt, and they immediately called the police. Now, this was back in 1990, so of course they didn't have like cell phones and smartphones right then where they could just call the police. They actually had to drive up the road a little bit to find a phone for them to use. Meanwhile, officers were pulling and putting all of these pieces together that they were finding. The kids' report of domestic violence, their missing mother, and the abandoned bloody sheet all pointed towards Dennis. Of course, hours later, a message came over the radio. A body had been found near a deserted road. Marilyn had been shot in the back of the head. The quiet counselor who touched so many lives was now just gone. And Dennis disappeared. And this wasn't for days, this was for weeks. Dennis evaded the authorities, and he moved from state to state using false names, fake addresses, and cheap motels. But perhaps the most chilling part was he sent letters. He sent letters back to family and friends. It was long, rambling, and sometimes multi-page letters filled with excuses, blame shifting, and bitter explanations. In one letter, he wrote, "Marlene made me do it." Another, "I was concerned and I had no choice." But the truth, it was simple. Dennis Depew couldn't stand losing control of anything. He wanted to be in control all the time. And he believed that hunting Marilyn was justified. Shooting her in the back of the head was his only way to gain control again. Now, on March 20th of 1991, nearly almost a year, a few months after this was done, and after the murder and the case aired on the TV show Unsolved Mysteries, millions watched the chilling reenactments, the trucks, the license plate game, the abandoned schoolhouse, and the body dump. This segment was eerie but similar to what they saw in Jeepers Creepers in 2001. Nearly shot for shot, it was the exact same, and they never even changed it because someone watched and recognized the description. Finally, in Louisiana, mid-evening, a viewer called authorities and said, "I'm sure the man from the TV of Unsolved Mysteries is in my neighborhood." Deputies located a van matching Depue's, and of course, when they attempted a stop, Dennis, of course, sped off and led them into a high-speed chase. Across the state lines, police was disabled, and of course, they finally did this to his vehicle. But Dennis wasn't done running. He fired at the officers and then barricaded himself inside. Not only this, but even in those final moments, instead of facing justice, Dennis decided to take his own life. And the manhunt was finally over after almost a year. But the story was far from forgotten. Now, let's be clear, the monster in Jeepers Creepers, the creature, it was supernatural being, and it was purely fictional. But however, that opening in that movie, the truck, the deserted building, the witnesses that were traveling, and the aggressive pursuit afterwards, that is almost directly lifted from the Depue's case. Now, I know that different movies take into different things, but this one was just almost, again, shot from shot, side by side from the Unsolved Mystery episode that was filmed, and the similarities were nearly scene for scene. The creeper may not be real, but Dennis Depue was the real creeper. And what makes this stick with us now and today? Well, maybe it's the fear of isolation, the lonely roads, the strangers who watch us too closely. Maybe it's knowing the real violence that can hide behind a calm face, a quiet voice, or seemingly near a normal neighborhood. Or maybe it's just because that when fiction happens, it also helps us understand the truth we don't want to face. Real monsters don't have wings, but sometimes they drive trucks. Now, thank you for joining me for this deep dive into a real story behind the Jeepers Creepers. If you enjoyed the episode, follow, subscribe, and stay tuned for more disturbing stories rooted in real life crimes. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road and stay safe out there.